the 8 signs you are on the right path, according to the Buddha. There's a story in the canon where Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī, the Buddha's stepmother, comes to see the Buddha after her ordination and asks for a brief teaching that she can put into practice. He gives her 8 principles for testing what counts as genuine Dhamma, genuine Vinaya. The principles fall into 3 types. There are those that are related to the ultimate goal in the practice. There are those that are related to qualities we have to develop within ourselves as we practice. And the 3rd type includes qualities that have to do with our relationship with other people, how our practice has an impact on others. In each case, the Buddha says, you see when you take on a particular Dhamma, and here Dhamma can mean a teaching, a mental quality, or an action, and if it leads to a certain type of quality that's not in line with the Dhamma, then you know it's not really Dhamma. In other words, you test things through your actions. Now, in some cases, you can look at something and know where it's going to lead. In other cases, you have to give it a try. The ones having to do with the ultimate goal and our true Dhamma are those that lead to being unfettered and to dispassion. Those 2 are very closely connected, because when the Buddha talks about things that fetter the mind, passion plays a huge role. This goes against the way a lot of us think. We like to think that our passions are our expression of freedom. With sensual passion, you think of all the different sensual desires that you might want to indulge in, or the sensual fantasies that you might want to create. And there's a lot of freedom there, you think. You have a whole range of sensual pleasures that you can think about and plan. If you get tired of sensuality, then there's the pleasure of form. The mind, as it gets into concentration and inhabits the body fully, that too seems to be a type of freedom. And then there's the pleasure of formlessness. You could have a passion for formlessness. When you've decided that even maintaining a sense of the form of the body becomes oppressive, and you'd rather just be there with infinite space, infinite consciousness, it all seems very wide open and free. But the Buddha says there's a slavery there even in those forms of passion. It's a fetter that keeps us tied to coming back again and again and again. The image he gives is of 2 oxen connected by a yoke. Is one ox the fetter of the other ox? No, the yoke is the fetter that ties them together. And it's the same with the senses. When there's a fetter between the eye and forms, is the eye the fetter of the forms, or the forms a fetter of the eye? Well, no. The fetter is in the passion that ties the forms to the eye, and through the eye to the mind. Years back, I remember hearing a reporter complaining about a Buddhist teacher. This was back in the 70s and 80s. Lots of young people were going to hear this particular teacher, and the reporter sat in one of the classes this teacher was offering. The teacher was talking about how passion is the source of all our suffering. The reporter looked around the room. He said to himself, these young people, they haven't really seen the passion of life yet. How can you be telling us that passion is bad? Well, the Buddha didn't start the path with dispassion. He approached the topic of passion strategically. You look at the duties of the 4 noble truths. The duty with regard to the first truth, suffering, which is clinging to the aggregates. You have to comprehend that, and part of comprehension is getting past passion for them. The duty with regard to craving, the cause of suffering, is that you've got to abandon it. How do you abandon it? By developing dispassion. The 3rd noble truth itself is dispassion. It's when you get to the 4th noble truth that you have to think strategically, because there's a lot you have to develop there. Without any passion for the path, it's hard to develop virtue, hard to develop concentration, hard to develop discernment. So you do concentrate passion on the path. As it says in that chant we have from the Aryavamsika Sutta, you develop a passion for developing and a passion for abandoning, developing skillful qualities, abandoning the unskillful ones. You want to take your pleasure there. Make it your sport, shooting down your defilements when you see them, and try to do a thorough job, as thorough a job as you can. It's only when the path is fully developed that you might think about what would be better than having to fashion the path. Getting to the goal would be better. And how do you do that? Through dispassion for the path. For many of us, we have a very negative notion of dispassion. It sounds like depression, but it's not. It's more a maturing. You might think of it as living in a village and getting involved in all the issues in the village of who likes whom and who doesn't like whom, and who has mistreated whom, and all the back and forth of village life. Then you leave the village and you go into the wilderness. You go up to the edge of the Grand Canyon, and just the vastness of the canyon makes you realize how small and petty all the affairs of the village were. This is similar to an image that the Buddha himself uses. You get out into the wilderness and you realize all the concerns of people and all the concerns of the village just fade away. The mind feels a lot more expansive. That's dispassion. The mind really feels expansive because it's not concerning itself with little tiny things. The Buddha tried to induce in his listeners a taste of dispassion when he gave the graduated discourse. You think of all the good things in generosity, the good things in virtue, the rewards of those things, but then you start thinking about the drawbacks. You work hard to get sensual pleasures, and then they spoil you. As I've said before, it's as if samsara were a sick joke. You work hard to get all these good things, and then, as you enjoy them, it's bad for the mind. They pull you back down. As the Buddha says, when you can see that the drawbacks of that whole process, and see even that it's degrading, you're working hard, working hard for something that's going to let you down. If you can develop some dispassion for that, that's when you're ready for the Four Noble Truths and the duties of the Four Noble Truths. So think about the concerns you have as you go through the day, the things you actually are passionate about. We tend to regard our passions with a lot of pride, but look at the things that the mind actually goes for, and then ask yourself, is that putting the mind in a position of freedom, or is it putting it in a position of slavery? In every case, you'll find that it's a slave to those activities. This is when you start thinking that it might be good, as a first step, to develop some dispassion for sensuality, and ultimately to try to develop some passion for the pleasures of form and the pleasures of formlessness. In other words, get the mind into concentration. Look for your pleasures there, knowing that someday you're going to have to go beyond them. But in the meantime, these are your tools for pulling away from sensual passion. After all, as the Buddha said, if you don't have an alternative pleasure to sensuality, then no matter how much you may know about the drawbacks of sensuality, you're still going to go back to sensual pleasures, back to sensual thinking. So provide yourself with this pleasure of concentration. Be passionate about this strategically. When you do that, your practice will be in line with the Dhamma and Vinaya. That puts the mind in a position where it can look favorably on dispassion, favorably on being unfettered. Because you look at life around you, pandemics, insane politics. I remember reading about a pandemic a century ago, and the article was talking about how the government lied to people, and the whole thing got very politicized, and a lot of people died as a result. I remember reading about that at the beginning of the current pandemic, our pandemic, hoping that we had learned our lesson but then the same thing's happening all over again. The Buddha's right. Samsara just goes around, around, and around, and it never learns. It's like Talleyrand's comment about the Bourbon family. They never forgot, but they never learned. In other words, they remembered old animosities, but they didn't learn any maturity. This is the type of world we keep coming back to. So when you see dispassion as a good thing, that's when you're really on the path. As the Buddha said, if you think that nibbana is something dull, or that it would have any bad qualities at all, then you've got wrong view, and it's going to hamper your practice. So learn to look on dispassion favorably, as freedom, as being unfettered, and that'll give your practice a real boost. The Buddha's Revolution. After Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī, the Buddha's stepmother, gained ordination, she went to see him and asked for a short Dhamma teaching that she could take and practice with. He taught her 8 principles for deciding what really is Dhamma, what really is Vinaya. If any activity, any teaching was in line with these principles, then it was genuine Dhamma, genuine Vinaya. If it was in line with the opposites, it was not. As I mentioned last night, these 8 principles fall into 3 types. Those that are associated with the goal of the practice, those that are associated with qualities that you have to develop in order to get to that goal, and then those associated with qualities that relate to your relationship to other people as you practice. And as I also mentioned last night, the ones associated with the goal have to do with freedom. The Buddha looked for freedom in an unexpected place. In dispassion, gaining freedom from the concerns that tie the mind down to its passions. Dispassion is like going out into the wilderness after having been bound up in the issues of being around home, being around your neighborhood, all the back and forth that goes on between people. You get out into the wilderness and you realize how petty all those issues are, and it's good that you're free from them. That's dispassion. It's not a depressed state, as some people think. And it's not a grey, unfeeling state. It's a feeling of great openness, freedom, that you've been released from petty concerns, things that limit the mind. It's an unexpected place to look for freedom, but there it is, true freedom. The same principle applies to the principles that are related to qualities you have to develop in order to get there. The qualities that lead to freedom do so in an unexpected way. The qualities are 3. 1 is shedding, in other words, getting rid of any excess things, excess mental states, excess attitudes that weigh you down. The second is contentment. Contentment with the material requisites you have in terms of food, clothing, shelter, and medicine. And then there's aroused persistence, which is basically right effort, learning to give rise to skillful qualities and abandon unskillful qualities, and putting an effort in to do that well. These are the areas where the Buddha says you look for freedom. In terms of shedding and contentment, think of that story of the former king, Padya, who was one of the Buddha's relatives and became a monk. He goes out to sit under a tree and exclaims, "What bliss! What bliss!" The other monks are concerned about him, thinking that maybe he's thinking about his old days as king, missing the bliss of kingship. So they go report the matter to the Buddha. The Buddha probably knows what's going on, but he thinks it's a good opportunity to teach the other monks. So he calls Padya in and asks him, "Is this true? Do you sit under a tree and exclaim, 'What bliss! What bliss?'" And Padya says, "Yes." "What do you have in mind when you say that?" Padya replies, "I think about back when I was king, and even though I had guards inside my room, outside my room, inside the palace, outside the palace, inside the city, outside the city, inside the country, outside the country. I still had trouble sleeping for fear that someone would try to come and kill me. But now, I sit under a tree. My needs are met by what other people give me. My mind is free like a wild deer. This is the bliss I have in mind. So there is a bliss in not being powerful and not having lots of things. You're not the target of other people's envy, and your mind can be free like a deer. A deer can go anywhere. There are no rules about having to go here, having to go there at this time or that time. So think about that when you feel, I'm missing this, I'm missing that. I'd like to get this, I'd like to get that. All those piles of things we see being placed out there on the table, you have to ask yourself, how much of that is actually necessary? How much of it is actually conducive to freedom? It's not quite that shedding and contentment are the same thing. They're different in the sense that shedding involves not only shedding material things, but also attitudes. The cases in the canon have to do with shedding pride. There was one case of a young man who was very good looking. So good looking, he figured he didn't have to bow down to anybody, even his parents. It was when he was able to shed his pride and bow down to the Buddha that he was able to get some place in the practice. There was also a case of shedding thoughts of revenge, realizing that an injustice had been done and wanting to punish the people who had acted unjustly. The story goes that there was once a young prince whose parents had been killed by a king, and the prince plots revenge very carefully. But then, when the time finally arrives that he can get his revenge, he thinks of what his father told him before he died. Don't look too far, don't look too close. Animosity isn't ended through animosity. Animosity is ended through non-animosity. So he holds himself back, lets go of those thoughts of revenge. As a result, he benefits in many ways. So when you know that you've been wronged and you want to get back, it's good to stop and think, what would be gained by that? Think about how many times the patterns of being wronged and doing wrong have gone back and forth, and ask yourself, isn't it time to stop? When you stop, there's a great freedom. I heard a story once about a mother whose son was killed. This was over in a Muslim country where the law was that the parents of someone who'd been killed had the right to decide, if the culprit was caught, whether to forgive him or not. At first, the parents were not going to go for forgiveness. They wanted to see the execution through. But then the mother kept having dreams of her son saying, Mom, please don't go for revenge, let the guy go. As she later told reporters, she did not want to have those dreams, but they kept coming again and again. So finally, on the day of the execution, there's the culprit sitting in a chair with the noose around his neck. She goes up, slaps him across the face, pulls off the noose, and lets him go. Afterward, she said she felt a great sense of freedom from that. So there's a freedom that comes of not wanting to get back at people, even though you feel you have the right to do it. It's through non-animosity that animosities are ended. Those are cases of shedding at an internal level. With contentment, though, the Buddha talks about contentment solely with regard to external things. On the internal level, he says you have to be discontent with the level of your skill. That, he said, was the secret to his awakening. That as long as he hadn't gone all the way, he wouldn't let himself rest content. Of course, you have to rest in concentration, but you rest and then you do work, and then you rest and then do more work. But he wouldn't let himself be satisfied saying, this should be good enough. I'll just content myself here. And we read about how, even after his awakening, he checked his awakening from many, many angles to make sure it was the real thing. That's the kind of teacher we have. That's the way we should approach the practice. This relates directly to the factor of aroused persistence. It's an unusual place to look for freedom, but the principle of right effort is that you look for causes and their effects. What kind of actions lead to what kind of effects? Then you judge the actions as to whether you want to do them based on the effects. Most of us, when we can, just do what we want and don't do what we don't want, without much thought for the long-term consequences. It's only when we're forced to do things we don't want that we do them. We do them against our will, or we're forced to have to abstain from things we would like to do. But here, the Buddha's saying, voluntarily, you learn how to enjoy doing the things that you don't like to do, but you know will give good results, and you learn how to enjoy stopping yourself from doing things that you like to do that will give bad results. That's a sign of wisdom, and that's where freedom lies. You're freed from your likes and dislikes because they're so arbitrary. Think about the foods you like now and the foods you used to like 10, 20, 30 years ago. Your taste in music, your taste in all kinds of things keeps changing. It's all very arbitrary. If you let yourself be ruled by these things, and if the things you like will get you to do actions that will lead to bad results down the line, why do them? That's a sign of slavery. In the same way, if there's something you know that will give rise to good results, but you let the fact that you don't like doing that get in the way, that's slavery. You free yourself when you act in line with discernment. That's why the Buddha put a principle of causality at the center of his shortest description of awakening. When this is, that is. When this isn't, that isn't. From the arising of this comes the arising of that. From the cessation of this comes the cessation of that. It's a more complex principle than it looks like on the surface. But at the very least, what you need to know is, you don't go by your likes and dislikes. You go by the results of the actions. Because when the Buddha applies that principle, he's not concerned about causality in general, the causality of billiard balls, or the causality of planets. He's concerned with the causality of actions and how they can either lead to long-term happiness or long-term pain. You're freeing yourself from the long-term pain that comes from just going by your likes and dislikes. You're opening yourself to the dimension of acts that lead to genuine happiness. So any teaching that encourages shedding, contentment with material things, and encourages you to arouse your persistence to do what's skillful and to avoid what's unskillful, all that counts as Dhamma and Vinaya. It's not the case that just because the Buddha didn't say something that it's not Dhamma. As he said, anything that's in line with the Dhamma counts as Dhamma, and these are the principles for deciding. So as you go through the day, ask yourself, the things I'm choosing to do, where do they fit in this scale? And am I choosing to go for more freedom or for less? Because that's what it comes down to when you say, well, I'm just going to humor my defilements for the day, or just for this once. Not for the whole day, just for a little bit. You're keeping yourself tied down. In a lot of areas, when no one else is tying you down, you're tying yourself down. So think about how you can learn how to do the things that you may not like doing, but you can talk yourself into doing them, because you know that they're going to lead to good results. As for the things you want to do, but will lead to bad results, you learn how to like talking yourself out of them. That's what it means to be in line with the customs of the noble ones, to delight in abandoning and to delight in developing, i.e., abandoning unskillful qualities and developing skillful ones. That requires a real revolution inside. When we think about the revolutions that have taken place in the world that were done for the sake of freedom, we can see where they've led us, often to just the opposite. They can't compare with the Buddha's revolution. His freedom is genuine. If you think of it in terms of victory, it's a victory that doesn't turn into defeat. This is another case of practicing the Dhamma in accordance with the Dhamma. The Buddha gives us these principles for recognizing what is Dhamma and what's not. It's up to us to choose whether we want freedom or would rather go back to our old slavery. Try to think of it in those terms. It makes it a lot easier to choose the path that leads to freedom. Modest, unentangled, unburdensome. In the principles that the Buddha taught to his stepmother, Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī, on how to distinguish what is Dhamma and Vinaya and what is not, there are three that have to do with how your practice affects other people. The first is that genuine Dhamma leads to modesty. In other words, you don't go bragging about your attainments or about how much you know. After all, the Dhamma has nothing to do with what other people think of you. They don't need to know what you're doing because, after all, the big problem is your problem, the way you're causing suffering for yourself. If you're able to make progress in that area, fine. If you have something to share with others, you share it in a way where you're not bragging. You try to stay modest. But as a general rule, especially in the forest tradition, you don't go around talking about your attainments. Ajahn Fuang got scolded by Ajahn Mun one time. He'd gone to stay with Ajahn Mun. He was able to check out the devas in the different hills around there. And apparently, he'd mentioned something about this to one of the other monks. And as Ajahn Mun said, "What you see in your visions is your business. It's meant for you, not for anybody else. What you learn in your practice, what comes up in your practice, if you want to talk about it to someone, talk about it to your teacher, because your teacher's there to help you. But if you talk about it with others, you run into several problems. One is that you have to ask yourself, what is your motivation for telling those other people? You have to look into that. The other is that they may give you some misinformation. They may have their ideas about what you're doing, and their advice may or may not be reliable. And if it turns out that you have a psychic power of some kind, if the word gets out, you don't have much peace. There's that story of Ajahn Lee visiting that woman up in the northern part of Thailand. He was on his way through, and a monk had come earlier and checked her out. She had been paralyzed for many years, and the monk told her, "Well, I can't help you, but another forest monk is going to come and he'll be able to help." Ajahn Lee was the next forest monk who came through the area. So the woman's children went to see him and asked if he could come and check out the situation, to see if he might be of some help to their mother. As he tells the story, he walked in the house, and already she was able to get up, move a little bit, enough to weigh him. And then within a day or two, she was totally cured. Immediately the word got out, and people were bringing jars and jars of water for him to bless. He realized he had to get out of there. There's a similar story in the canon. Sita, the householder, invited a number of monks to his house for a meal. On the way back, it was a hot day. The Pali says that they walked along as if they were melting. The junior-most monk asked the senior-most monk, "Wouldn't it be nice to have a rainstorm right now, with a bit of breeze and a few drops of water to cool us down?" And the senior monk said, "Yes, that would be very nice." All of a sudden, a storm came up, with a cooling breeze and just a few drops of water. they got back to the monastery, and the junior monk said, "Is that enough?" And the senior monk said, "Yes, that was very nice of you." They went back to their huts. Well, Sita had been following them, and he saw this. So after the monks had gone back to their huts, he went to the junior monk, Mahāka, and said, "I saw what you did. Can you do anything else?" Mahāka looked at him and said, "Okay, take off your upper robe, put it on the porch here, and put a pile of grass on top of it." So Chitta did as he was told. Then Mahāka went into the hut, and all of a sudden a flame came out through the cracks around the door, consumed all the grass, but left the cloth. Then the flames died down. Mahāka came out. Sita was shaking in his robe and his hair was standing on end. Mahāka said, "Is that enough?" And Sita said, "That's plenty. And if you need any food, clothing, shelter, or medicine, just let me know. You can stay on here as long as you like." Mahāka said, "That was very nice of you to say that." But as soon as Sita left, Mahāka packed up his stuff and left, because he knew there would be trouble. Either there would be jealousy from the other monks, or the word would get out to the lay people, and other people would want to come and see his powers. So if you have something special like that, keep it under wraps. Our problem here is people have nothing nearly that special, yet they like to show off whatever they know, especially if they've been online and have read a lot of things about the Dhamma and have lots of ideas. We've had many quote-unquote ajahns come through, and you have to realize that the reason we read the Dhamma, the reason we study the Dhamma, is to cure our own defilements. It's an internal job. Other people don't have to know. As Ajahn Lee once said, the things that other people do know about are not safe, but the noble attainments are totally internal, so they're ultra safe. As we chant every day, they're pakatam veditabo vinyuhi, to be known individually by the observant for themselves. To be quiet about what's going on in your practice is a good thing. There's that story in the Theragatha about a novice with psychic powers. The Buddha sees the novice, points him out to Ven, Sariputta, and says, "See that novice over there?" Sariputta says, "Yes." He's a novice studying under Anuruddha. Every day he levitates to the Himalayan mountains and washes his teacher's bowl in a lake there. His predominant thought is, "Let nobody find out about me." That's the kind of attitude you should have as a practitioner. People don't have to know. This is directly related to one of the internal qualities that we develop in the practice, which is shedding. Shedding your pride, shedding the need to look good in the eyes of others. If you have something really good inside, it's good enough in and of itself. Awakening is its own reward. The skills you develop in terms of concentration, insight, they're their own reward. Nobody else has to know. The second quality that affects other people is being unentangled. If you spend a lot of your time involved in the issues of other people, you don't have much time to practice. This is directly related to the internal quality of persistence, because you've got a lot of unskillful qualities in your mind that you have to sort out. The more you get entangled with other people, the less time you have for your real work. Even when you do have duties that involve other people, you learn how to have a sense of just right. The Buddha had some nice praise for Ananda one time, saying that when Ananda would teach lay people, they would delight in listening to what he had to say. He never spoke so much that they got tired of listening to him. In fact, he'd always stop before they felt they'd had enough. He wouldn't drone on and on and on. This principle applies to conversations. If you have conversations with others, deal with what has to be dealt with, then stop there. Our problem is that we start talking, And one topic leads to another, leads to another. It's like a chain. We keep forging new links, and then of course, who gets bound up by the chain? We do. So if you want to have time to do your practice, you've got to learn how to deal with people in such a way that you take care of what needs to be taken care of. Speak enough so that the work gets down. People are on good terms, and then just drop the topic, cut things off. Ajahn Fuang was very good at this. You always wanted to hear more from him. But he had a very clear sense of how much was enough, which usually is a lot less than the enough. Ajahn Fuang was very good at this. You always wanted to hear more from him. But he had a very clear sense of how much was enough. So that should be one of your questions. We have the questions from the Buddha. Is it true? Is it beneficial? Is it the right time and place? And you could add Ajahn Fuang's, is it necessary? That cuts through a lot of idle chatter right there. And finally, there's the principle of being unburdensome. As monks, we do have to depend on lay people. After all, we can't handle money, and there's a reason for that. As the Buddha said, anyone for whom money is okay, the 5 strings of sensuality are also okay. If you're out there handling money, buying things on your own, there's no control over what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. You can get anything. We do have to depend on lay people. So you want to make sure that you place as little a burden on them as possible. This relates directly to the internal quality of contentment. If you have enough food, clothing, shelter, and medicine, okay, you've got enough. Don't sit around thinking about what more you'd like to have. I've heard some people complain, I think that the fact that monks don't handle money is a burden on the lay people. But again, think about not only the appropriateness of this, given our practice, but also about the fact that people who handle money sometimes start amassing funds. They're very much in control of the funds, and issues in communities where people are holding on to the money can drive the community apart. So it's good that we have these rules around money. As for what little burden they place on people, we have to make sure we're not asking for money from anyone. It's interesting. When the Buddha talked about placing burdens on people, say when you're building a hut, it's always the burden of things they would have to buy, or the burden of too many requests. But requesting a little bit of assistance, that's part of being a human being. So that doesn't come under being burdensome. It's only when you make a lot of requests of people that it becomes a burden, or when they have to shell out extra money. That's a burden. So you have to be very careful. Try to develop as much contentment as you can, and it's in this way that your practice is in line with the Dhamma, because these external qualities, as I said, relate to internal ones. Modesty relates to shedding. Unentanglement relates to putting an effort into the practice. Being unburdensome relates to contentment. All of these qualities that we're developing are for the sake of freedom. Some people think their freedom lies in showing off as you like to other people. That freedom lies in having as many friends as possible, as many activities with their friends as possible. Freedom in being able to impose on others. That's freedom in the world, and it's a very immature freedom. The Buddha's looking for a different kind of freedom, a freedom that comes from inside. It's going to involve developing external qualities that place some restraint on us, but that simply focuses our attention where it should be focused. If there's restraint on how you behave outside, you have to turn your eyes around. If you're going to find true happiness, you've got to look inside. So these restraints are for the sake of freedom. The more you appreciate that, and the more you act in line with that, the more freedom you'll find.